All right, good morning, guys. Afternoon, evening. We're just going to sort of um, go through the process of rivers and creeks and using a couple methods on how to use some of the flow painting to sort of guide your way into creating um, some rivers and creeks. I'm sure there are plenty of ways to do this, but this was just one of the many ways that I've found out how to do it. Um, let's see. I am joined by Stefan as a surprise guest again. All right, so I'm just going to real quickly sort of shape the terrain something a little bit beyond of what the basic is. So, real quick, actually, let's just go ahead and do some of this painting. I guess I could have done sort of using one of the seeds, but that's okay. We're just going to sort of try and get some sort of shape so that I can show you guys different flow techniques. We're going to bring this down a little bit. And it's not going to be perfect. It's just going to do just enough to exemplify exactly what I want to show you. And one thing I noticed with the sort of flow texturing is that it doesn't seem to like how it smooths out flat surfaces. I'm not quite sure why that is. So like when you add a flow or you add a texture based on flow distribution, anywhere there is a perfect flat surface, it sort of ignores. And I know part of that's due to the generation, but some of that, I don't know if it's a bug or not, but we can work
we need
around
to
that.
check that.
Sorry?
Yeah, we need to check that. Probably it's a bug.
Yeah. It's like even, you know, how this right here looks relatively flat instead of sort of transferring all the water down and filling in this area. It just completely negates anything that's a zero in slope. So to avoid that, I sort of just push the terrain up and down in areas so it doesn't look like it's messed up. All right, that should be good for now. Let's actually change our sun angle. And one last quick thing, because we're just messing around with this, I'm going to lower all of this just a tad. All right. So there's a couple ways that we could go about sort of shaping and sculpting rivers and lakes. So the first thing that we would like to do, let me pan around here somewhere that I haven't messed up too much. So obviously we could manually sculpt them in. So that is one more of the tedious ways to do that, which is perfectly fine. It's super creative. So whenever you're thinking about sculpting for rivers and creeks, obviously the further down the hill, the more collection there is with water. So it's going to be wider. You know, it's going to, the sculpting will need to be wider and cut more the lower it gets down on the height, and it'll be thinner as it goes up. So sort of like in this custom base shape, it's not optimal at this sort of subdivision for sculpting any amount of river right now, unless it's a super big river. And the larger rivers are going to be down here. So down in this valley here, or a collection area here, you can see the grid is low. If you want to draw a river sort of in this direction, then, you know, these are your sort of larger pitted areas where a subdivision like this would make a little bit more sense. But you know, we can take this and drop them down a tad, but we're going to want to increase our subdivisions so that we can have some sort of smoothed out water edges. So let me increase this to tab. This is okay, but I'm going to increase the subdivision one more time because water is going to be relatively smooth. So the sides of everything is going to be relatively smooth. So what I like to do is you can start in either direction, either from the top or from the bottom, but just know that, again, the bottom is going to be wider than it is at the top on how water flows. So if you're manually sculpting, then you would consider, holding control and scrolling to have the brush size or selection size big or small. And let's go ahead and just paint in right here where we want a little river to form. And I'm going to hold control down again so that I can again add more of a collection area. So from here, we have sort of the base to where we want the water to collect. And we're going to want to try and either go with the procedural generation of where water would be, or if we want to be creative and sort of sculpt out the hillside here on our own. Either way is fine. We can, at this point, if we're going to start at the base, we'll just scroll on our mouse wheel to have the selection go up just a tad bit more, maybe just one notch like this where the selection is a plus, and we can sort of paint in up to these areas. So I'm just going to fill in a little bit where I think some sort of collection would be with water. You can sort of see where the grid line is showcasing sort of the topography. If you have difficulty seeing, sort of guessing where, the natural topography is, as long as you don't declick out of this current selection, you can go to the environment tab, which is the sun icon here, and you can move around light to kind of see where your topography is naturally forming. And then if you go back to the biome tab, you can continue working based on where you were before. So as long as you don't, like I said, declick and lose your selection, you should be able to move the light around to see it. I would hope, and Stefan can confirm this, there would be some sort of like developer's view or debug view that shows all of, kind of removes the lighting, like a delit version, so that you can see everything, kind of like for sculpting purposes. Yes. Kind of like, okay, great. Yeah, kind of like in ZBrush and Blender where you can change the shader just to help you see easier when you sculpt. Maybe the whole terrain is this nice clay looking color and you have the shader for certain slopes to look a certain color while you work.
Yes, this is no problem. We will have this in the next update.
Ooh. We're gonna have a long next update, that's for sure. We may have to split that up into like an intermission or something. Morning Ninja Style, the new World Crater looks super sweet. Yes, it definitely looks super sweet. I've had to go back to World Crater 2 a couple times for some things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's been so ancient since I've looked at World Crater 2 in a long time. Yeah. All
right, so new UI is coming as well for World Crater 3. So
yeah. I'm not gonna say any spoilers during this stream, but you are free to say whatever you want, and then if you say it, I'll deem that public knowledge at that point. Stefan's like, you signed a non-disclosure. You can't talk. Anyway, fun stuff aside. All right. So at this point we have sort of the medium, like side rivers or side creeks. And you see they're a little bit thinner than the main river here. So now what we want to do is scroll down to the smallest version, which is a single square. And this is where we're going to be, sculpting in the actual creeks. So creeks or streams. So streams flow into creeks, creeks flow into rivers, rivers flow into lakes and oceans, et cetera, et cetera. So this sort of subdivision is still probably 1 too wide for sort of this scale, but you get the point. We'll go down and make smaller selections here in just a second. So with a single one selected, we can, do these really short sort of striations out from, even on the main one here, we can do these really tiny extensions out beyond where the little creek and rivers are. So we're going to do this a few, and don't worry about trying to be super accurate at this point, because this is what we're doing here is sort of just shaping the overall bulk detail a bit. We're going to do more of the fine tune adjustments to really make it look like water whenever we texture it and whenever we add filters here in a little bit. And that's going to look a bit more realistic. So later, I do know that this sort of selection process that I'm making will become a savable selection. So we don't lose what I'm painting in here right now, because if I misclick by chance, I will lose whatever I've made right here, which is unfortunate, but it will come so that we can save these sort of selections. So I'm just going to follow down some of the shaded area of the topography and kind of do a generic guess of where water would flow off of. And you could be super creative at this point. I feel like I'm just rambling on like Bob Ross. Happy accidents. This point. All right, so we have a little bit here, there, and this single square is probably going to represent some sort of creek, and then the texture beyond this will represent the streams that flow into the creek. So this, we're going to use this selection to displace the whole terrain to kind of give it some character, and then use, like I said, filters and textures to show the flow simulation of it. All right, so imagine, think of how, in order to do this, in addition to trying to follow the natural curve of the topography in front of you, or again, be super creative, rivers kind of look like backwards lightning bolts or tree structures. So just imagine, we're just creating a tree structure or a lightning bolt effect straight out of all of these areas. Then we have a collection up here of some kind. Filtering through. Oh boy, I've totally lost it now. See what I mean? I tried to fix an issue with the music and it declicked out. So I'll just do this real fast to get the point across. I didn't mean to erase. It's still the same thing as adding, except you right click on the mouse button to erase. So there we go. I'll just do this haphazardly since I had already done it before and misclicked a little bit. That's okay. Because we're not going to see all of this quite extensively because once we add filters, it's going to kind of hide some of the thinner ones that we've done. But we're going to add another biome on top of this to sort of make a more smooth, fine-tuned effect on top of what we're doing. All right, so before I lose this selection again, so at this point we have sort of the base, river structure here. So I'm going to go ahead and just lower this, but I want to make sure that the scrolling here to feather it out is at least a notch or two wide. So that way we can have some sort of smooth width to all of the water. So I'm not going to go down too far because we can see we can create some really deep caverns here. I'm just going to go down with, all right, so here is non-smooth. I'm going to scroll on the mouse wheel twice here to get 2 levels of feathering. And I'm going to probably lower this down to just 2 meters. And we can see that has lowered down 2 meters. Now, before I remove this selection again, I'm going to do another displacement, but this time I'm going to have 0 feathering. And then that way I can go down just 1 meter. Well, down 1 meter. And then that will help sharpen up exactly where the selection is. So we had a wide sort of, let me click out of this real quick. So we had a sort of wide selection and another sort of intermediate selection. So you can see we've sort of created the basic structure to where we want water to flow whenever we add the textures. So we could go back to the custom base shape, and I'm going to go ahead and increase the subdivision 1 more notch and maybe 2 notches so that the selection is really tiny. And if you want at this point, since the selection is super tiny, we can do those really, detailed streams that feed these little feathers into all of the water canals that we just made. So this is why knowing your subdivision is really important up front, because it's going to help shape your terrain a little bit more fine-tuned exactly where you want it, because the wider the subdivision, the more broad the detail is, and the lower the subdivision, the more fine-tuned it is, or vice versa. The higher the subdivision, the more fine-tuned you can make it divide the terrain just like this. So we're just going to haphazardly add these little streams here that feed into where we were before. And it's going to help shapen up where we want the textures to be hopefully applied to. So you can spend some definite time adding all these water effects, and you're not going to necessarily see these little streams, but it's going to be a little more shaping for the generator to latch onto whenever we add that flow distribution, which is going to be another method of helping you. All right, so this aside, let's just look at this side. And if we were to widen this effect a little bit, and maybe I don't want it to feather that much. We just want to lower 1 feather. There we go. So then we added these nice little tails. All right, so this is sort of one direction that we can go about doing this. All right, is it possible to make sense to make the river a biome?
I think so. Actually, it's intended.
Sorry?
Absolutely, because actually this is intended. I mean,
Yes.
what you're doing is sculpting a river, right? But in a later version of World Creator, there will be a river tool that is automatically going to create rivers, or well, either automatically, using procedural techniques, or on the other end, something like I want to start here and I want to end here. So you just World Creator calculate me somehow a river from that location over to that location, and then automatically it will be a biome.
Yeah, that's a really good intention. What I'm doing here, I'm basically starting out the hard way to show people how you can do this right now. If you want the full custom control, you're gonna, make this a modeling tool where you're just gonna go in and sculpt the rivers the way you want. It's going to be a longer process, but you have that ultimate freedom. So this is just one way of going about sculpting it. Another way, and we're going to leave this side alone so that we can go back to it later. Another way is if I wanted to, when you think about sculpting, you're going to want to, especially with mountains and things, you can want to sculpt the larger detailed pieces of the terrain first, and then work on the rivers and streams afterwards. But we could use filters as a guide in order to help you sculpt of where World Creator will especially, do the erosion filters for you in a certain way based on how you've shaped the bulk detail of the terrain. And you can use the filters to kind of guide you on where you want to add additional sculpting. So, one is obviously the grid simulation here. You can sort of use the grid simulation to, and I don't think that actually looked right. Oh, it's because I have, anyway. So yeah, you could use the grid simulation to sort of tell and feel where you want water to go. Oh, I zoomed in way too far out. Far out. So yeah, like with the grid simulation, it sort of shows you some guidance on where uh, things would go. Increase the surface erosion here. Of course, this is all still very dependent on what sort of precision level you have. I have it at a half a meter. So the precision level is going to help guide these filters a lot. Another one that we could use instead of the grid simulation is erosion flow. Now, erosion flow, you can definitely see it shows you these paths like right here. This is why this particular filter is really fantastic, because you can follow these flow patterns. So if you wanted to, let me change the lighting. Yeah. So if you wanted to sculpt and follow these flow patterns, you can have a natural sort of formation of where water would go based on the larger details. And so you can then go in and say, hey, I want to sort of, if I increase my brush a little bit, I want to follow this line right here. So I'm going to follow this line right here. And you can make it as wavy as you want to go with it or not. And then if you lower it, the simulation is going to keep adding to it. Or if I want to flow right here into this area. Or down just 1 meter. I'm hoping at one point we can have sort of the height selection here instead of it being 1 meter. Maybe there's, I think we talked about this once before, having the selection allow you to do it on a more fine, instead of it being one based on meters, maybe it's based on 0.0 meters or 0.001, a little bit smaller adjustment. Like I'm lowering it and raising it here, but it's still within, there was a moment where it was still within 1 meter.
I understand. That's a good point. We'll just note that down because that's true. It's important.
Yeah. So this you can see that the erosion flow filter is now just going to fill in sort of where I've sculpted down for a sort of a river chasm. Cool question. Would there be actual presets, better templates that work seamlessly with Unreal Engine 4? Also, are there any intentions on making a bridge plugin tool across both programs? That is a fantastic question, where I believe is the intent at some point, but I'm not quite sure when that'll be.
Absolutely. I mean, the intention is there, but we need a little bit more time to implement that. So first, we have to finish World Creator,
Obviously.
and then we can do the bridge. Yeah, then we could do the bridge. The bridge for Unreal, well, it must be really a bridge that works and is not changing each time a new update of Unreal is released. So yeah, this would be a little bit tricky, but actually we are already in contact with Epic talking about this. So just a matter of time.
Yeah, and yeah, just trying to get the main stuff in the main World Creator tools kind of figured out first before trying to implement all the plugin stuff would be ideal, because at least at least in the meantime, adding the export feature and all that stuff, you can get this into Unreal, with the manual method, which some people prefer because they have a little bit more control. But yeah, it'll be up to you on the sort of pipeline that you want to use at that point. So as you can see, it's just as simple as using that's way too much. Widen it a little bit. It's as simple as using a filter to sort of help guide you where the natural flow is, and you can follow that down as much as you want. Another quick way to, because right now this is making the terrain look really wavy with the filter, and I love this filter. But if this is too wavy, and you want to focus on the main sort of cuts that this particular filter is going to use, just I'm going to have another video, another live stream where we look at all of the erosion filters and really break down what all of these settings are. Because, especially the grid simulations, it can be kind of intimidating if you really don't know what to look for, because there's a lot of settings involved. Because, the more settings, the better, because it's going to give us more flexibility. But yeah, let me rotate this light around so I can see this piece here. So if you wanted, like I said, to see what the main sort of erosion cuts are going to be without this particular filter cutting in all of this hillside here, just change the flow cutoff. If I were to lower this a tad, it's going to reduce sort of the amount of how much of it grabs away from the topography. So if I went all the way down to 0, we can start to sort of simulate what dunes are going to look like. So this is a little bit of a teaser of another live stream. We're going to talk about creating some realistic dunes, and the erosion flow filter is a really promising contender. I mean, look at the sculpt that we made before. It almost looks like sand just kind of flowed down right into that cavern. But you can see, even when I have it turned all the way down, I change my sun angle again. You can see the harsh cut right here, and obviously right here, and all of these cuts through here, these cuts right here. So you can kind of see more naturally where the sort of concave nature of the terrain is based on just sort of cutting it off. So think of the flow cutoff as sort of the clamp value that you're applying to the terrain. So if you wanted to, and we're just using this erosion flow filter just for sculpting. Once we turn it off, we can see this is what the terrain's base would look like. And if we re-enable it, it's going to add the detail, but maybe we can go back to something like this. So adding a little bit of smooth aspect to it. And we'll be able to texture this to resemble water in just a little bit. All right. All right. So the next way that we can go about sort of guiding us on how to do the terrain is based on a texture. So we're going to leave erosion flow the way it is. And let's come over to this quadrant. Now let's go to the texture icon here, add a new material, and we're just going to change this color to red. Actually, let's just go ahead and just change it to blue so that we can represent water here. And then if we click the effects category here, we can select flow. And flow is obviously going to distribute the texture based on sort of a water flow onto the terrain. But again, if we were to go to the custom base shape, we can also, based on this texture, use this texture as a guide in order to know where to sculpt for our custom rivers. So right here, we can see that we have, I'll make my brush a little wider so that you guys can see. Right here, we have the flow telling us that it's coming through in this direction. And I'm just basically painting over where the blue is, changing brush sizes to sort of fill in those gaps. So I hope that makes sense, because this is one quick way if you just needed help from the generator on where to fill in for sculpting for rivers and creeks and streams. So it's a super quick way. You're just basically painting right on top of what the automatic generation is telling you based on your sort of formation. See right here, Stefan? This is sort of what I was talking about with the flow texturing. It does a weird thing with super flat. That's okay. We're just going to paint in right through here where this water is showing us that it's flowing right down into this area. And obviously we're going to have a nice water collection little pond or lake right here at the base. And you see these sort of small lakes all the time at the base of mountains. So we're just using this again as a guide. That was a little hefty there. All right, and then we can just again lower it any number away. I'm just going to lower it 1 meter below. And we'll adjust the flow simulation to fill in a bit more of where we just sculpt. So that's a couple ways on how to go about it. So now let's go ahead through the process of sort of texturing what we've done. So let's go back to the textures here, but I'm going to add a couple filters first real quick to get us something to look at. So let's base this off what we sculpted here earlier. Go back to the filters and let's go ahead and re-enable Erosion Flow. And let's adjust the flow cutoff here a little bit. All right, so let's hide this. Let's add a little bit more mountainous stuff. So let's add the mountains filter and let's add canyons. And let's add one more. If I remember where it was. There it is, Cratered Cliffs. So we're just gonna make Cratered Cliffs based on slope and only affect these super steep areas. Do canyons based on slope as well. And we'll make it start a little bit less. Mountains, we're going to also make this distribute based on a slope. The steeper slopes, and start it at 45 degrees and feather down a tab. But we also want this. We're also going to make the mountains distribute based off a height. So let's do height first. See where we can. Yeah, it's appearing right there. We got to get some heat maps in there as well. And we'll do this one also a little bit based on it. I'm just trying to add a couple little effects here. I want the Cratered Cliffs also based on a height. So I see it moving right here. So we'll keep it about right there and feather it down a little bit. And let's add one more, the hills, but the hills, we're going to distribute it based on the lower values. I can't see it, Stefan.
What are you looking for?
I'm trying to find where it's located.
Forget the slider. We have completely replaced that slider.
Yeah. All right, so let's add Erosion Flow back. Let me get a drink. Yeah, Ninja, this is all pretty amazing stuff. I can't wait to get my hands on some of the new aspects. Actually, just remove that. And we can add erosion fluvial, but let's also add erosion flow back. So you can see the little stream that I made right here was a little bit too much for that, but this side should appear a little bit more natural with the water flow. Adjust the cutoff a little bit. All right, so a couple things that we can do is also sedimentation is going to make a big play on this. So I also like to add sediment complex, and the length makes a big difference on how much it's basically collecting. So the more you can see right here, the higher the value of the length, it's going to fill in sort of where I've cut more, and the lower the value, you see it's filling in less. A good rule of thumb is with erosion flow, if you've got the cutoff, say, pretty high, so you can get some of these natural flow techniques. With the sediment complex, you can fill that back in, or you can use a really low value. It's a nice combination to have a high value and a low value of sediment. So sometimes duplicating the sediment complex can give you some really good results. But we're just gonna wing it here. So you can see it's 1. I fill in that area just a little bit. All right, and then so we kind of have sort of a rough area that we want to establish. But the erosion flow here, I've noticed, is taking up too much of our top. So we're going to make sure the erosion flow affects mainly where it's going to showcase that it's collecting. So let's select the filter rule here and do a distribution based off height. So I want the tail ends to kind of start somewhere around midway of this mountain and then flow down. So we're going to increase the bottom value so it showcases everything in the bottom. And if we lower the top end just a tad, you can see that line is right here. So go somewhere about halfway up the hillside here, because we want some of that rock and mountainous area to pop out. But let's feather off the top end just a tad so that we can keep the rocky top at the very peak of our ridge. And we can sort of also showcase the flow around the bottom.